Marisha here, and today I'm going to share with you why I left the teaching profession. I want to preface this really quickly with some statistics about the teacher shortage in the US. So, this school year, the 23-24 school year, 86% of school districts in the US reported facing challenges in filling all of their vacancies. And they cited a lack of candidates in general, as well as a lack of qualified candidates. And to that point, over 160,000 teachers in the US are not actually qualified for the positions that they hold. And that's a result of stopgap measures that some districts have put into place where they hire people who are not actually qualified to teach. They have no training in pedagogy, and, if you've ever been in, this usually happens more in college classes. If you ever had a college class that was taught by a professor who clearly was an expert in the field, really knew their subject, but just didn't know how to explain it to people, then you know what I'm talking about. There's a difference between knowing about a topic and being able to teach about a topic. And so you know how bad it is to have that kind of a teacher. And then the last statistic that I want to talk about is the results of a Merrimack College teacher survey in 2022 that found only 12% of teachers feel satisfied in their job. And even that surprised me as someone who left the profession. That's a really low percentage. And it really should be eye-opening to people and cause them to think about how serious the situation is and think about ways that we can improve the situation. So, I'm going to share with you the two major reasons that led to me leaving the profession. And again, I'll say that there are myriad reasons why people leave. And if you know other teachers who have left, they might say the same things that I do, but they might have other reasons instead or in addition to. And please just listen. I would implore you to go seek out people who are teachers and ask them, like, why are people leaving? Why do you think people are leaving? Or if you know someone who left, why did you leave? I think the more that you can educate yourself about kind of what's going on, the better, because everybody should have a vested interest in what's going on in the public school education system. So for me, the top reasons were, first of all, a lack of work-life balance. And the pandemic really contributed to my realization. That sort of highlighted to me the problem. And I would say it's not a coincidence that I made this decision post-pandemic versus pre-pandemic. Before the pandemic, I would get to work at 6:30 in the morning and I would leave usually close to 4, sometimes later. Sometimes I could maybe sneak out around 3:30, which was still after contract hours. And then as a coach, I still would stay some evenings later because of practices or because of an evening scrimmage or competition. And then also sometimes had an entire Saturday taken up with coaching. And if you know teaching, you know that grading and lesson planning does not all happen during contract hours because your planning period is not enough time. And so it comes home with you and it bleeds into your evenings and your weekends and your breaks. And so it's Christmas break. Yay! But I have 60 Macbeth essays to grade. Boo. And that's just, I mean, that's the reality for teachers everywhere. Is just, there's not enough time within contract hours to do all of the duties that are expected of you. And so you end up working outside of contract hours to get all of your work done. Um, and again, I didn't even realize how much of my time was being spent on my job until we went 100% virtual in the pandemic, and suddenly I had some time gifted to me. Um, and it was really interesting because first of all, there's no commute, so I got all that time back. They also shortened the school day and the school week because students really could not handle being virtual for that many hours. And then they also instructed us to really dial back on assignments. So there wasn't as much grading as there would be in a normal time. So I sort of had like this some of this time gifted to me that I could use to do things that I would have loved to have done before if I'd had the time. And suddenly, I wrote a novel. And, that first year I ran 1,200 miles and I cooked food from scratch because I actually had the time to do it. And so that meant I was eating healthier. And I, took some classes online just for the fun of it. And I started a YouTube channel. And that's actually this channel, but I let it kind of fall by the wayside because I wanted to spend more time on like the novel and stuff, but that was the beauty is like I had the time to explore all these different things, and if it was just sort of dabbling with something and then letting it go, that was fine, and then finding something that I really loved and having the time to spend on it every day if I wanted to, that was really great. And it's really interesting because you know even though teaching in the pandemic was dystopian, it was awful and we all hated it and it was exhausting. And I might do a video about that in the future. There was this sort of silver lining of, being able to kind of have more vibrancy in my life. And it was this really strange paradox that, like, it was more vibrant in the sense that I was trying all of these new things and hobbies and stuff, but it was also less vibrant in the sense that as a single person, I sequestered to my apartment. I went an entire year without touching another human being. And literally, it was when I went to go get my vaccine, and the nurse was like, wiping my shoulder with the alcohol pad to disinfect it. And I was like, oh, that's what human touch feels like. I remember now. I mean, it was really bad. Like we all know the pandemic was bad, but like, especially teaching during the pandemic and especially being a single person living by yourself was also really bad. But, as we started to get back into going back to school and it was hybrid, and hybrid was even worse than fully virtual. Again, if I make a video, I'll talk about it. But and then eventually sort of getting more and more like back to normal, I could tell that I was not going to be able to sort of keep um that time to myself. I could tell I was going to slip back into the old patterns of this is how much of my life is going to be taken up by my job because, I still wanted to coach. I still wanted to do the things that I did as a teacher that required me to spend the time that I did preparing lessons and grading. And, I didn't want to be a teacher who grades an essay just by like reading through it and just putting a letter grade on it without writing any comments or marking anything up. And, you know, so I didn't want to be a teacher who just, you know, did all of my assessments on Scantron and it was the same test for like 10 years. And so somebody's older sibling could give them the answers because everybody knew that, this teacher does the same thing every single year and it's the exact same test. And so, that kind of thing. And so I didn't see how moving forward I would be able to kind of regain or maintain the sort of healthier work-life balance that I had during the pandemic. And then the second reason was a lack of respect for the teaching profession. And I know that some people watching this are probably automatically thinking that I'm talking about how teenagers are so disrespectful, but that's not it at all. It was not the students. Teenagers actually are great because they're old enough to know what's going on in the world and to care about it, and young enough to not be jaded yet. And so they actually want to try to change the world. It's very refreshing. It's the adults that are the problem. And I think most teachers will agree with me on this that if you want to talk about a group that makes your life miserable, very rarely are you going to say it's the kids. So for me, it was a couple of groups of adults. The first is parents. And it felt like every year there were more and more parents who just misbehaved. Um, without going into specific stories, I'll just say, you have parents who grade grub and who harass you about a kid's grade, like continuously, even though they have access to the electronic grade book 24 hours a day, and they can go in and look at their student's grade and look at the assignments and see what they've turned in, what they haven't turned in, and they would still harass you about it and sometimes act like you were the problem instead of the fact that junior has not turned in, 3 of the last 5 assignments. Um, and then you'll have parents who will not support you when you're trying to maintain discipline in your class. They'll act like their kids shouldn't have to obey the same rules as everybody else, or they might actually defend their students' really bad behavior. um, I won't go into all of the details of this story, but for example, I had a student who turned in as his assignment something outrageously inappropriate for school when I had specifically said, both orally and in written instructions, that everything had to be school appropriate, because it involved poetry, and it involved choosing song lyrics to analyze as well as writing your own poetry. And so, it's like, well, you have to choose songs that are appropriate for school, and same thing in your own writing. Like when you're in college, then you can write things with swear words and drug references, etc. But for high school, you got to keep it clean, right? And he turned in like everything, every part of the 4 parts had something that was inappropriate, and one of them wildly inappropriate with like sexually explicit content. And I had to sit in a teacher parent meeting with the administrator, and then the parent was on speakerphone. It took my entire 90-minute planning period, and I already told you, like, I don't have time to waste, right? Like I need I need that planning period to do grading. Trying to explain to this mother like why it was wildly inappropriate for her son to turn in a song that included the word punani for starters, and among other things, right? It was Ice Cube's "Had a Good Day." If you want to look it up, not that, just content warning. It is explicit. It's really bad. It's a terrible choice to turn in when the instructions are to keep it school appropriate. And this mother was like defending her child through this whole thing. And it was such a waste of my time. And, I can look back on it now and kind of laugh because, like, oh my goodness, my poor administrator had to explain to her who like Ice Cube was and who NWA were and like what punani means and stuff. Um, but not everything is something that I can look back on and laugh. I had parents who went over my head and went directly to counselors or administrators and to talk about some issue that they had. And so when the counselor administrator came to me to talk about it, that was the first I was hearing of it. That is super disrespectful. If your problem is with my class, then come to me. I am the professional, treat me that way. And one parent who did that is also a parent who made me feel unsafe at work. Um, and I'll talk about this actually in a separate video because it's a really important story that I think needs to be told. But the short version is that this is a parent that for the rest of the year, I always was a little bit afraid that they might come to the school and either try to hit me or shoot me. And I won't get into school shootings on this video, but that's certainly another factor that is, I think, well, every teacher thinks about. And I wouldn't be surprised that there are several teachers who leave the profession because they feel unsafe in their work environment. But in addition to the parents, being bad, there's also the general public and politicians and this kind of like zeitgeist of turning public schools into a battleground for the culture wars. And you'll have politicians who, from just the very local level of school board all the way up to running for president and everything in between, and they'll say on their platform something like, when we're gonna take the schools back from those godless liberals who are indoctrinating students with their woke agenda. And they really like to throw around this word indoctrination as though, first of all, as though public schools as an institution are homogenous and public school teachers are homogenous, as though we all belong to a particular political belief system and a particular religious belief system, and that all public schools are really the same when they're so wildly different from one state to the next and even from one district to the next. And certainly every teacher is an individual, and you're going to find teachers on the entire political spectrum, and you're going to find teachers with all sorts of different belief systems, different religious beliefs, or people who don't have a religion or whatever. And to paint them all as though they're just this one like tiny sliver of like far left atheist kind of um, like beliefs is just indicates that you have no idea what public schools are actually like or what public school teachers are actually like. Because, when people start throwing around indoctrination when they're talking about public school teachers, there's a couple of reactions that you have. The first is kind of a more of a funny, like, well, honestly, if I could indoctrinate students, they'd all be doing their work and turning it in on time, and I wouldn't have to get after them for having their phone out in the middle of class. Like, give me a break. But then there's a more serious response, which is like, are you kidding me? I just went through like how much of my life I spend on this profession. Um, and I'm teaching your kid how to read and write better, right? Or, I'm teaching your kid math, or, teaching your kid whatever. And, I don't have time to indoctrinate them with some sort of like, whatever ideology you think it is that I believe. Again, you don't know, because teachers have a wide variety of beliefs. And also, I parent your child. Teachers take in loco parentis seriously. We build relationships with our students because we genuinely care about them. They're not just like, oh, well, this is my class of empty vessels that I'm going to teach how to conjugate verbs, and when I'm done, well, that's it. No, these are people that I genuinely care about, and I build a relationship with them over the course of a year, and sometimes it's more than a year because maybe I have them as a 10th grader and I have them again as a senior, or maybe I have them every year because I'm coaching them. And I I genuinely want them to succeed, not just like, oh, I want them to get an A in my class so I look good to my boss. Like, no, I want them to do well in all of their classes, and then I want them to go out into the world and to be happy and successful. Like, it's not just their academic life that I care about. I want their whole life to be healthy and positive. And as part of the like process of building relationships with students, or one of the results of building relationships with students, I should say, is that they then trust me with some really personal information that um, I think I need to share with you some of the things that students have said to me so you get an idea of the kind of role that teachers have in their students' lives. Um, So, I've had students tell me, I think I'm pregnant and I don't know what to do. I've had them tell me, I'm 6 months clean from cutting. I am afraid I'm going to slip into my eating disorder again. I invited a boy over last summer and he drugged and raped me. I'm trans, but please don't tell my parents because this kid was like clearly terrified. Um, I might have to drop out of school to get a job because the bank is going to foreclose on our home. All sorts of issues, and like really serious stuff. And I lose sleep over my kids, and I pray for them, and I cry about them. I will never forget the student who like I was in a parent teacher meeting. It was like all of the teachers and the parent. It was just kind of like a check-in to kind of see how the student was doing or whatever. And the parent revealed to us that her child had been, abused by a family member regularly from the ages of 9 to 12. And I lost it on the way home. Like, I could barely see the road because I was crying because, like, I love my kids and I'm not exceptional. I'm not telling you these stories because, like, I'm the super teacher that kids all love and trust. Like, no, I am every teacher. Like, every teacher has students who trust them and come to them with this kind of stuff. And for some students, that teacher is the difference between them, like, completely losing hope and them, like, being able to make it. Not every parent is a great parent. Not every parent makes life safe for their kid. And thank God that many kids find that safety in a trusted adult at the school. And for people in the public to either as politicians sort of make up these stories or paint this picture of public school teachers as like these monsters, and people in the public to just like really just eat it all up is not just insulting, right? Because it's not just like, oh, they're calling us names, that's so mean. It has a direct impact on our workplace. First of all, that's why I think so many parents are misbehaving the way that they are because of the rhetoric that's going on about public schools and public school teachers. It leads to that lack of respect on the part of parents toward teachers. And then also, it directly impacts our workplace because these politicians, if they get into office, then they try to pass legislation, and in some instances have passed legislation that directly impacts our work. There are places in the states that have now passed legislation to dictate like what exactly history teachers can teach and are trying to get them to like not teach slavery accurately. And then there's like a whole bunch of book banning going on, which of course as an English teacher is very disturbing. And the idea that I'm not trusted, I'm not respected as a professional who has an English degree and 15 years of experience plus training in pedagogy to choose a novel that will resonate with my students and that I can use effectively to teach, literary styles and techniques to, that I'm not trusted with that because some person who like really has no clue about the reality of what public school is like and who just has this agenda again of they need something to stir up their constituency and get them up in arms so that they have this basically this boogeyman that they can fight, that they can, get riled up about, and so they can get votes. To have people buy into that and then, get on that bandwagon and try to dictate to me how to do my job when these are not people who have any background in education. They are not people who have any background in literature or, any sort of, the humanities. And these are not people, sometimes, a lot of times, these are not even people who have children in public schools, right? You will have people show up to school board meetings and like make a big fuss and they don't actually even have students in the district. Um, it's, it's, it's beyond frustrating, right? Because it directly impacts my work. Um, and I could go on about this and get into some specifics and stuff. I don't want to get super political, except that, you know, the political is personal. It does directly impact my job. And I could see the ways that it was impacting my job in the last several years that I was teaching. And like I said, I might do some videos with some specific stories of things that happened. I will talk about that parent that made me feel unsafe. Um, but these are the reasons why I decided to leave. Again, Other people have other reasons. There are a lot of issues that I could talk about, but these are the big two for me. And I don't want to say that I would never go back into teaching, but right now I can't see myself doing it. I definitely need a break. And, I'm sorry that this wasn't a positive video, but you probably should have figured that it wouldn't be, because if you're talking about leaving something, there's usually a reason why you're leaving. But in general, I'm hoping that the channel will be positive, and certainly the next video, I'm going to talk about, how or like why I chose the UK, and that will be, a nice positive fun video, and beyond that we'll move into kind of the progress that I made and what are some of the practical things that I had to do to get to where I am, and we'll go from there. So the next video will be why I chose the UK. So stay tuned for that.